Hi, my name is Alen. I'm a business designer, and welcome to the Beyond Users podcast, where we learn about business to become better designers. In the 47th episode, I spoke with Andy Butt, who is a UX designer and CEO of innovation and design agency Clearleft. But Andy is probably even more known by curating a few very well-known conferences in the design community, such as Leading Design, which is a huge international conference bringing design leaders together. He also curates UX London conferences, and he helped set up the Brighton Digital Festival. So in this episode, we spoke about the biggest learnings from the last Leading Design conference, which took place in November in London. We talked about why and how designers should say no to their managers. So what do you do when you find yourself in a situation where you don't agree with the work you're doing or the path that your company is taking? And finally, we also talked about the current state of the design education. So if you're interested in design leadership, one thing that we also talked about in this episode is the lack of business literacy in the design community. And if you want to raise your business literacy, you can also sign up for the 7-day free mini MBA email course. So over the next 7 days, you would get 7 business concepts in your inbox to learn more about the business. And to sign up for this email course, you can just go to beyondusers.com. And now, without further ado, here is a conversation with Andy. Good. So, Andy, you and your agency, Clearleft, you're organizing this great design conference called Leading Design, right? So, I thought it would be a great idea to maybe kick off with sharing a little bit with our listeners what is Leading Design, how it came to be, and then we can go a little bit maybe into the learnings or what did you learn or what were the big themes of the final or the latest conference you had in London.
Excellent. Well, it's a lovely place to start. So Leading Design came about maybe 5 years ago now. And it came about almost by accident, really. I was catching up with friends in London over coffee and tea and cake, as you would do. I'm British, so, lots of tea and cake gets consumed. And kind of catching up with my friends. And a lot of my friends, because I've been doing this for a really long time, I've been in the industry for 20 years. And so a lot of my friends are other designers. And they started out like me as a design practitioner. And then maybe they became a design lead. Then maybe they found themselves managing 3 or 4 people. And then they maybe became a director and they were managing 20 or 30 people. And in some cases, they became VPs managing hundreds of people. And over the course of maybe 3 or 4 months, I probably had a dozen or so of these coffees. And I basically found that I was having the same conversations like Groundhog Day. Different people, but everyone was suffering the same challenges. For a start, they'd taken on jobs because they were great designers, and the companies had kind of really decided they wanted to invest in design, which first and foremost was amazing because the previous 3 or 4 years, all of my designer friends were frustrated because the companies I worked with didn't get design and they were fighting for resource. So now these companies had realized, wow, design is a great tool for competitive advantage. And I think a lot of this came about from the fact that, technology has become commoditized and actually you can get a lot less value from technology these days. And design, I think, is a defensible competitive advantage. It's very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do well. It's very difficult to replicate. And, you can create value through design. And so a lot of my friends' companies have realized this and come to them and said, look, we need to scale up our design effort. We need you to go out there and hire a bunch of designers. And so that was the first problem my friends were facing is like, wow, well, this is great, but there aren't enough designers to go around. So hiring and recruitment was really challenging. Once people had managed to hire and kind of get these people on board, then they struggled to sort of get them motivated. So how can we build a great culture? How can we build a culture where designers thrive? How can we get them onboarded in a way that kind of allows them to hit the ground running? Then the problem my friends were facing was like, how do we keep them? We've got this sort of massive recruitment sort of thing going on. Maybe we've got an open headcount of 10 designers, but for every 2 designers I hire, 1 designer leaves. And so you're kind of 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And so again, a lot of things my friends were discussing is like, well, how do we retain people? If you look at sort of California, quite often sort of the Bay Area, designers are sticking around in their roles for maybe like, if you're lucky, 18 months or 2 years. If you're lucky, I see people moving around every 9 months. And there's lots of research that shows it takes about 9 to 12 months for a designer to get up to speed and start delivering value. So the point at which you start being able to deliver your value back is the point where a lot of people are moving on. And then if people did stay for a while, how could you elevate design in the organization? How could you educate your peers in product, in engineering, in marketing, in sales, so they can really understand the value that the design can bring? And then also, once you've got that going, how can you look after the career progression of your designers? How can you, rather than losing them because they want to jump around from job to job to get a promotion, how can you kind of like grow a design team that kind of fits your exact needs? And so these are sort of the 5 or 6 trends that just kept coming up over and over again. And often over tea and cake, I was trying to sort of give my friends advice around how you can scale, how you can source, how you can build a great employer brand, how you can sort of look after your team and nurture them and sell design into their executives. And it was just getting really tiring. So I thought, well, rather than having to do this on a one-on-one basis, and I'm not getting paid for this, I'm not a professional coach, maybe I could get all these people together. And so, that's where Leading Design came from. I kind of took a hunch that there would be enough design leaders in the UK and Europe to support a conference like this. And it was a big hunch because I was really scared that nobody would turn up. But I put the event on, we booked the date, we got some amazing people from around the world, people who had grown and scaled, big design teams. And people showed up, and actually people showed up in mass. Our last conference in New York, we had over 1,000 people on the wait list. It was crazy. Like, we were blown away by the demand of this conference. And so the conference has been running for a few years now. The first 3 or 4 years we were just running in London. And then we sort of branched out. Last year we did New York. In a couple of months' time, we're going to San Francisco. And again, the feedback we've been getting has been really, really fantastic. It feels like we've really hit a nerve. It feels like a lot of people are suffering. They thought that by becoming a leader, all their problems would be solved. That somehow a job title and a budget and a seat at the table would somehow unlock this sort of, trove of kind of possibilities. But actually what really has happened is it just created a whole bunch more. It's created a whole bunch of more challenges for my friends and for design leaders. And so, that's really the sort of the gap we're trying to fill, is how can we help design as an industry blossom? How can we help designers that have got the seat at the table that they've been longing for, deliver the value that we know and believe and have experience with, that design can bring into the hands of as many people as possible. But one of the lovely things, one of the sort of the surprising sort of outcomes of leading design in general was that actually the conference has become a really, really safe space for a lot of people to kind of discuss their fears. I think, a lot of junior designers, when they go and speak at conferences, there's a bit of a bravado and they're sort of, they're untouchable, they're amazing, everything they do, turns to gold. And I've been really humbled by how you can have people that are running design in some of the world's biggest companies just talk about all of their screw-ups. Talk about how they were terrible designers or terrible managers. Talk about how they did terrible one-on-ones or made mistakes recruiting, or found themselves in teams that weren't as diverse as they should have been, and how they kind of went around to solving those problems. So I've also been really, really impressed with the sort of the humility that a lot of design leaders have, and the willingness to help pay forward and help other design leaders coming up sort of behind them to avoid the mistakes that they made. So it's been wonderful so far. We're really, really enjoying it, and looking forward to San Francisco and getting stuck in with crafting the narrative around London in September, I think, or November. Yeah, November, I think. Yeah. Take us back to the first conference. Take us back to the moment, even before the conference came to be. Like, you had this idea. What was the next step you took? Well, I have a slight problem, and that slight problem is creating conferences. So I think it's an addiction. I think if I was still a practicing designer and technologist, I would probably be spending my evenings and weekends like hacking on some kind of cool, tech startup. But you wouldn't want me building anything these days or designing anything. But what I can do is I can send a bloody good email. And I've got a really good connection of people. So, I ran the UK's first sort of digital design conference called Deconstruct, which ran for 10, 11 years. And actually, ironically, we're bringing that back for like a one-off kind of one-shot this September, which I'm really, really excited about. It's kind of more of a TED-type inspiring kind of digital tech and culture conference. I've run UX London for 10, 11 years, which is the longest running UX conference in Europe. And so I've kind of, we've run other events as well. So running events is pretty straightforward. I guess the two things are, finding people who are willing to come and speak. And like I say, because I've got quite a good network, reaching out to friends of mine that have got into those positions was relatively straightforward. And because we've got a history of running really, really high quality events, when I said, I'm doing this conference and this is what's going on, most of the people I reached out to were like, yeah, that sounds amazing, I'm down. So one hand, building up a program, and then the other hand, finding a venue, putting it on, and then, hoping that you've got enough network to kind of pull people in. So yeah, finding a venue. So a lot of it was like running around London to different venues to see what the vibe was, to see whether we could afford it, to see, basically, I'm an experience designer. So making sure that the physical space works, making sure that the food is great, making sure that it's central, it's easy to get to, are all kind of important transferable skills. And so once you've got the venue, then it's just a case of like, putting it out there, taking a punt. Any entrepreneur has to at some stage put their money where their mouth is, take a risk. And the risk was that if people didn't show up, we would have lost a ton of money. But you have to have faith in your community. You have to have faith in your ability to feel signals and sense check and see whether the signals that you're feeling are the signals that other people are feeling, to the level or degree that there will be a market there. And, we put it out there and, we sold out. And, the first one went down so well that immediately afterwards, everyone was like, we want to have another one. And so, every conference, every product, every app, every feature is just a one-off until people love it and then they want more. And so we had our market validation. We saw that there was demand there. And then I guess, 2 or 3 years on, we noticed that we had lots of people coming from the US. Now, normally that's actually quite unusual. Normally you see in conference land, lots of Europeans going to America, but very few Americans coming to the UK and Europe. I think that's partly because, unfortunately in America, people only get a very small amount of holiday time. And you might have to take holiday time off to come to a conference. Some of it is just around the size of America and the number of events are on. But we just started seeing lots of people coming from all over the world, not just America. We had people from Australia and New Zealand, Japan, Southeast Asia. And people kept telling us, like, this is the only event of its kind. I'm a design leader in Singapore. I'm a design leader in South America, in Mexico. I want to get better at my craft. And this is the only place I can come to do that. And so, so we were really chuffed. And so we took the punt and we thought, well, if this worked in London, I reckon it will pretty good chance it will work in New York, particularly because the US tends to be a couple of years ahead in terms of scale. So we thought, well, if people are having these like growing problems in London, they're sure as hell going to have them in New York and San Francisco. And again, we doubled down. We bet the farm on one of these events, and again, we were lucky that it panned out. We've been really impressed with the outpouring of love and support we've had from the design leadership community.
What makes a great conference? I assume that as a designer, you spend a lot of time actively thinking how you can design the best design experience conference experience for the attendees, right? So, what separates a good conference from an average one or a bad one?
Well, it's sort of similar to what makes a really great movie. You can go in a bunch of different directions. A lot of people that are organizing conferences focus on production value. A big stage, you've got all the high-tech sort of equipment. They've got beautiful, lights and sort of signage. You've got the best food. They've got all this stuff. But when you go there, if they haven't put effort into curating the content, it can feel quite hollow. I think a lot of conferences focus more on the sort of whiz-bang kind of visceral kind of design experience. And also, quite often, they focus on the brands of the speakers. So I've been to dozens of conferences where it's a lineup of really, really impressive looking companies, but actually the content is hollow, it's shallow, it's poor. So my focus is completely the opposite. I'm more like an art house sort of director. We tend not to do these big flashy performances. Our conferences are quite small. Our budgets are quite frugal. We put all of our effort on curating speakers. You'd be surprised at the number of people the conference organizers, that won't pay their speakers. They won't pay for them to fly over, put them up in hotels, but will pay for a really, really impressive video graphic on the stage. For me, completely opposite. Like, our production values are very low, but people come back time and time and again because we are providing them with content that they want. And content in the form of genuine human stories that they connect to, that they can see themselves in the situations that our speakers explain. The speakers aren't going up there and saying, we're perfect and all you people in the audience are idiots. Our speakers are going up there and saying, you are us. You could be on this stage. We've experienced all the kind of problems that you've experienced, and here are some of our ways of dealing with them. And so audience kind of, you sit next to some of our audience members and they're just filling up notebooks full of notes and recommendations, which is amazing. And they're feeling seen, they're feeling heard. And so if the content's good, all the other things kind of, sort of fade into insignificance. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try and find great venues and, we don't try and make sure that, we have, we've got a great coffee company that we work with, that we bring them up from Brighton, that, that make amazing coffee. We give coffee beans to our speakers in the goodie bags, and the coffee company will grind them there live. So so you've got the freshest coffee. We have juice bars and kombucha bars and stuff to try and make the experience as pleasant as possible. But really, a lot of that is in service of allowing our speakers and attendees to connect. We want people to stay in the room. We want people to have genuine conversations, genuine human connections. And so that's the reason why we kind of sort of do these sort of, peripheral things. We've worked really hard on our carbon footprint as well. We've done a lot of sort of, work on finding the right receptacles for water. We need to give people water so they can drink, but, it turns out tins are more environmentally sort of, friendly than bottles or plastics. Giving people reusable cups, in their goodie bag is much better than people over the course of 3 or 4 days, burning through loads of, recycled cups. Making sure the signage is recyclable and low impact, making sure anything we give out to our users, our sort of, attendees is recyclable, reusable, something that they want rather than something that's going to end up on a trash heap. It's a challenge for conferences because quite often they are flying people in, and so there is a big carbon footprint there. But the other stage, I would rather have 5 speakers from the US come to London than 50 people from London fly to a conference in the US to be able to see the same speakers. So I think, on the whole, we try to minimize our sort of footprint, and that's been really, really fun. And we'll carry on finding out ways to do that. But yeah, the content really is the thing that draws people in and keeps them coming back.
Mm-hmm. And how do you make sure? So if this is the focus point for you, right? If your team is focusing on getting the best people and getting the best speakers, how do you actually make that happen? What is the process behind finding the best people? Because most conferences, I guess, just focus, as you said, on big brands. Oh, that person works there, so we can put there whatever the name of the company is, and then this is going to draw in a lot of people. But if you invite people who are not that famous or, don't work for the big companies, you maybe have a marketing problem. Marketing problem, and also how do you make sure these people that are not so famous, they're good when they come and speak?
Absolutely. You're right. I think the reason why a lot of people focus on the brand of the speaker rather than the content is a marketing thing. It's kind of like, well, if we have Google and Facebook and Airbnb and all these people at our event, it helps us sell. Now, we have a lot of those people at our event as well, but we're not leading with, this is the person from this company. We're leading with, this is a person who's got a fantastic story to tell. The reason we do that isn't, these kind of big companies have got interesting challenges that they're facing, and that's the reason why we have them rather than marketing. In terms of how we do it, I mean, I'm fortunate as a speaker. I speak at a lot of conferences, maybe less so now, but these days I probably speak at 10 conferences a year, or 8 or 10 conferences a year. I used to speak a lot more, so I get to go to lots of conferences and see lots of speakers. I probably, in the course of a year, watch well over 200, 300 conference talks, videos, probably more thinking about it. It's probably about 200 per conference I organize. So I get to see a lot of content. And, of the 200 talks I see, 10 might be, of the quality and of the style and of the content that I think is a good fit. Also, I rely heavily on my network of people. So a lot of speakers that have come in the past will say, oh, there's an amazing person you should meet. Mm-hmm. They're really, really good. And often I'll reach out to them and try and get a handle of, if they've not spoken before, if they don't have video online, they might share me some of their ideas. They might share me a Medium post they've written, et cetera, et cetera. We try as best as we can to find diverse voices. A lot of our speakers have spoken before. I mean, particularly with leading design, because the people that are in leadership roles tend to be quite senior. Often they have sort of spoken before, but there are always sort of people that are kind of experienced leaders that don't sort of have that sort of craving of the limelight. So, you work hard to kind of find new voices. And every time we run a conference, there's usually 2 or 3 people on there that we haven't seen speak before, that might not have spoken before, or if they have, they've spoken at a small local networking event and aren't kind of, aren't sort of exposed to the world. And it's really, really brilliant when you find a speaker that you're like, well, I think this person is going to be amazing, but I'm not sure. You take a punt, and they turn out to be like one of the best speakers of the whole conference. And we've had that plenty of times. We've been blown away by speakers in the past where we're like, oh, this was a bit of a risk, but this person has really, really paid off. So it's fun. It's fun seeing that. And I think for me, again, one of the weird things I find about a lot of conferences is they haven't really paid any sort of attention to the story arc. You'll see speakers and you're like, well, that person's talking, let's say just it's a general UX conference or design conference, there'll be a person, on first talking about design systems. And then 3 talks later, there'll be somebody else talking about design systems. And you're like, well, why did you put those 2 other random non-related talks in the middle? Why didn't you join them up? Why didn't you create some kind of arc or flow? Mm-hmm. And I'm always amazed that conference organizers do so little of that. And so we try and tell a story throughout our conferences. So leading design, generally on the first day, it's personal stories. On the second day, it's stories about the team and the organization. The first day kind of starts usually with kind of like personal development skills. To be a great leader, these are the skills you need to develop. But then we usually sort of veer more into like, well, now you've developed these skills, here are some individual challenges you've faced. Maybe you've faced bias in the workplace. Maybe you've had to deal with burnout. Maybe, you've had to fire people and you've had, and that's been a really, really, traumatic experience, looking at kind of self-care and looking at the leader as a whole. And then the second day, once we've kind of dealt with the individual, and once the leader's strong enough, then they can look after their team. So how do you find people? How do you grow them? How do you develop them? How do you, share design around the sort of organization? And so each of our conferences has this really sort of lovely story arc that starts quite deep and personal, but then ends with practical, useful information that people can take away and start using tomorrow. And if we crafted it the other way around, then it would be a different experience. But then people would end up with a quite emotional, intense day. And, that could have, that could be quite challenging for people. So starting emotional and then leading to practical means that you kind of, peak end rule, you get a beautiful high on the first day, but then you get real relevant practical, output on the second day. And a lot of our events, we sort of craft interesting narratives throughout the day. And so that's another challenge we face with finding speakers. Often it's not just about a case of like people who can really give a good talk, but finding people who can fit in with the story you're trying to tell. So I kind of almost liken it like I'm a casting like agent or casting director for a movie. You might have a great, sort of lead, but you might want to find, another actor that fits in her husband's role. And so, like, you might have two or three amazing kind of like, male actors, but if they don't fit chemistry wise, or you can't picture these two people together in a relationship or business context or whatever, there's no point in having them. Mm-hmm. So this is also one of the challenges when people say, well, I'd love to speak at your conference. It's like, well, you're great, but you don't fit the narrative arc or the story we're telling this year, but you might fit next year. And so, and invariably when we meet people, it might be 2 or 3 years before they're the perfect fit for the story we're trying to tell that year.
That's really interesting. I mean, just hearing you explain the whole thinking behind this process, just explain why this conference is so successful and, how you bring people to emotional stage and then to rational stage. That's really cool. Really cool. So let's maybe have a look now more detailed at the latest conference you had in London. And what were the big themes? What were the big takeaways? What were the learnings? If you could share with us, like, what felt was important? What was the narrative maybe first, and then what came out of the conference?
Well, like I said, I sort of the narrative that we had in London was the one I sort of described earlier. So I won't sort of repeat the sort of pattern of the couple of days. Mm-hmm. But I think there were a couple of really interesting sort of outcomes. I mean, I think this is one topic has been bubbling away for a while, and I think it's something that's probably close to your heart as well, which is a realization. Well, a couple of things. So first of all, I think designers are wonderful, emotive, creative people. But quite often, because they are also quite unique in the companies they work in, they often, sort of have lower resourcing than engineering. They usually have lower status than product or finance, or what have you. They're often kind of, othered, and because of that, they often other the rest of the organization. So you see a lot of the time designers bitching about product or marketing or the business. And I think that one of the first realizations, and I think it's really important to keep iterating this, and this is something that came out at the conference, is you are not other from the business. You are part of the business. And if you take yourself out of that, you are not being as good a partner as you can be. So first is realizing that you are the business. And secondly, if you are the business, you have to have a much better understanding of how the business works. And I think one of the reasons that designers get really frustrated is because they struggle to explain the value that they can deliver in a way that is meaningful to the people that need to be taught. Mm-hmm. And the design leaders that I meet that are successful, some of them are successful because they're super creative and everyone goes, oh, wow, you're the crazy creative person. We'll do whatever you want. But more often than not, it's because they have learned to navigate the political sort of systems of business and know the right people to talk to get budget, know the right people to talk to unlock resources, know the right way of communicating what they do so that it resonates from a business perspective, not just we're doing the right thing, we're caring about users, isn't design, amazing perspective. And so being better qualified to talk the language of business in a way that you are perceived as a equal, I think is really important. I kind of sometimes joke that that designers have got a seat at the table, but it's a high chair, and they're sat in the corner playing with their crayons, while all the sort of the business people are actually making the decisions. And then every time, every now and again, the designer will show their picture, and everyone go, "Oh, that's lovely, dear," and then go back to the work. And so we need to can't be sitting at the table but being in a high chair. We need to be an active participant of that conversation. And that also requires us to have a position on things that aren't design related. And so, I know quite a few of my design leader friends that have embarked on MBAs in order to give them a certain level of legitimacy or a certain level of fluency. I know many more people who are, participating in various online courses. I hear there's some good ones out there, in order to kind of increase their fluency in this kind of sort of stuff. And and so I think that's a really big theme of last year. And so I think last year a lot of our speakers were saying, we had 4 or 5 speakers that were saying, hey, you need to understand business better. And so I think this year and next year, we probably take some of that and go, well, that's great. Who can we bring in that can help teach our design leaders to be a little bit more fluent in this stuff? So that was kind of one big sort of topic and takeaway. I think another obvious, ever-present theme is one of diversity, and making sure that when we are hiring teams, we are hiring groups of people that have a broad collective sort of background of experience, and not just hiring homogenous teams that look the same or talk the same, that come from the same background. But also, that can be quite tough. If you are the first, sort of African American person on a team, if you are the first kind of Indian designer on a team, if you're the only woman, regularly in a meeting of 10 people, you can feel sort of quite left out. And so a lot of the people that spoke sort of shared their own personal experiences of the challenges that they've faced. And I think that was a really, really good opportunity for other design leaders to sort of reflect on this and make sure that when they are hiring, when they were recruiting, when they are assembling teams, they do so in a sort of considered way. And I think a lot of that also is reflecting on some of the anxiety that we've been facing in technology over the last 3 or 4 years around us, maybe creating designs that had unintended consequences. There's a lot of ethical conversations happening at the moment. And I suspect a lot of the challenges, not a lot of them, but I suspect some of the challenges we're facing, we might not have faced if we had design teams that were more representative of the users. And if we had design teams that were thinking more around how products can be used, abused, misused, etc. So that was another sort of sort of big thread. And I think maybe a third thread, which is always ever present, is just the challenge of burnout. Design leaders are often finding themselves in quite tricky situations. They have increasing demands from the design team, particularly, sort of younger, sort of millennial kind of Gen Z designers have very, very high expectations of what their job should be, what their career path should be, often quite rightly so. But that puts a higher level of burden on design leaders, many of whom have never had any formal training. Maybe they've never learned how to do a great one-on-one or a great, deliver sort of, difficult feedback, or explain to somebody why, just because they're 18 months out of a general assembly course, they're not ready to make director yet. And so, this can be quite challenging. And a lot of the stories were stories of burnout, of people, running, burning the candle at both ends, running too fast and smashing into brick walls. And so I think, in order to be a good leader, you do need to be able to take care of yourself. And I think one of the challenging things for designers is because designers tend to be quite empathetic. They also tend to, particularly, and we learn a lot about servant leadership. Often designers are understandably putting their staff, their team, and their needs above one's own needs. And that's incredibly laudable, and it's a great way of managing, and it's the right way of doing it. But you also have to look after yourself. And so self-care and getting that balance right was another kind of big theme of the event.
Have you ever had a burnout? Experienced one?
I don't believe I have, but I think that's partly because I'm in a very fortunate position that as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurship is tough, but at the same time, you get to define how you run your own business. You get to hopefully define the culture, hopefully define the values, hopefully define what you will and won't do for money. So while it's hard, and while you do end up taking on a lot of responsibility, what you don't find yourself in is this weird cognitive dissonance a lot of design leaders find themselves in, whereby they know what is not working. They don't have the power and the agency to fix it. And when you don't have the power and agency to fix something, that can be incredibly stressful. If you have the power and agency to fix things and you don't fix things, well, you're just not doing your job as good as you could, which sucks. but I think you're much less likely to get these high levels of stress than when you have, a situation where you are fighting for what you believe is right, but you don't actually have the mechanisms to change. I think the other thing is, to be completely honest, like Clearleft has always been a slow growing business. We're a small 30-person design agency in Brighton that, has more work than we generally can satisfy deliberately, because that then means that we're not always chasing the next project. It means that we can be a little bit selective about the work that we do, and that gives us a little bit of freedom to choose. Whereas if you're working in a fast-moving startup where the head of product says, we need you to go out and hire 20 developers or 20 designers tomorrow, you have no control over that. You're just being thrown work. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that what happens with a lot of designers is we want to help people. We want to please people. I can't remember who it was, but one of the speakers at sort of one of our leading design events was basically say, like, the best thing you can do as a design leader is learn how to say no. Developers are great at it. Developers often their default, position is no. Can you do this? No. Can you deliver this? No. And then they might come back to you in a week's time and go, well, actually we can, and here's how. What ends up happening is design leaders are just so pleased that someone's talking to them, so pleased that the head of product has asked them to do something, or the head of marketing has asked them to do something. They'll be like, sure, I can do that. And then they fit it in their lunch hour, and they fit it in at the weekends, they fit it in at the evenings. And suddenly they find they're doing the job of 2 or 3 people. And that's when you burn out, when you can't say no. And you burn out because you're doing a job that you love. A lot of people end up not burning out because they can say no, partly because they don't like their job and they're not engaged. Designers are often too engaged for their own good. So learning to say no, learning to push back, learning to say, or at least not no, just say not yet. We can do that thing for you, but we have to let this other thing drop. Or we can do this thing for you, but in 3 months' time. Or we can do this thing for you, but you need to sign off budget so I can go out and hire 2 freelancers. And we're just too nice and too willing to help that we don't have those conversations, and and then burnout happens. So it's not something that I've had. Also, the other thing, to be honest, I'm quite lucky. I get to travel around a lot. I have lots of holidays. I live in the UK. We've got good social sort of healthcare and all that kind of stuff. If I was, working in the US where we had 2 weeks holiday a year, and you could be fired at a moment's notice for not even doing anything wrong, again, that would be quite a stressful situation. So it's not something I've experienced personally, but I know a lot of people that have, and it sucks.
Let's go a bit deeper here. I think this saying no is super important. And I'll give you an extreme case or extreme situation maybe, and let's break it down and see what your advice for this designer would be. So let's say you are a junior designer, right? And you just joined in the last 6 months a new company, and you get to work on something that you feel is just not productive, not correct, not the right thing to work on. How do you say no in these situations where you just join a company, or you're being seen as just a junior person who should just do whatever the other people tell him or her to do? So how do you react in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough question, and the answer is really that I don't know. I think the perspective I was coming from earlier was from the perspective of somebody who has been hired in a leadership role to guide a part of an organization forward. And in that situation, you have more authority to say no. If you are a junior, it can be really tough. For a start, like I said, a lot of designers often, can come across as a little bit kind of difficult to work with because we have this sort of ivory tower view of design. And I think as a junior designer, on your first job, immediately saying, no, I'm not going to do that, kind of, you've got to be careful about not branding yourself as difficult. I think, also the other thing is like, as a junior designer, whether you think the thing that you've been asked to do is right or wrong, you probably don't have enough context at the moment to really, really know. You don't have enough influence to necessarily change the decision. And you haven't built up enough, kind of like capital equity for people to trust your judgment. Mm-hmm. I think as a designer, as a younger designer, what you need to do is you need to, first of all, demonstrate your value. So even if you're not sure that the thing is right, if you can come up with another way that will be even better, it's definitely worth having that conversation. Go to your boss and say, look, I don't think this is the best way possible. I think there's another way forwards. And that conversation might play out. I think choosing not to do the thing that you've been told to do and doing something else could be quite challenging, because there might be a whole bunch of reasons. There might be some kind of business deal going on that is this is a requirement of, and you might be there going, well, I don't think any users will want this. And you haven't been briefed that actually, well, someone's just spent £1 million on this and we need to get it over the line quickly. So you've got to be careful there. I think if you think there's a better way, do the thing that you've been asked to do, but then prototype the better way. Yeah. And at least you can then show some variations. Like, one of the things that designers are great at doing is the whole kind of double diamond, the going broad and the going narrow. A lot of executives and a lot of bosses quite often jump to the first most obvious solution for a thing. So it's possible that what you've been asked to do is just the first most obvious solution. And that's the one you should work on initially, but it's perfectly within your right, if you've got some time and space, to go and explore a couple of other options. And it might turn out that those are better. It might turn out that those are not. But again, as a good designer, you should at least explore the edges. Then come back and explain why you think your idea is better than the others. But also, if they say, well, no, this is definitely what we want to go and do, go ahead and do it. The other tool that I think designers have in their toolbox is research. And that might be kind of user research in the sense of like, oh, that's great. We'll prototype this thing. I'll do it. We'll put it out there. But let's just sense check. If we feel that there's some feeling that this thing might work, let's just do some really, really light testing. And it doesn't have to be like hiring a lab for a week and expensive, kind of testers. It could just be some cafe testing round the corner, buying people coffee and asking them to look at your thing. And then at least if you can go back and provide evidence for why the thing that you've been asked to do, you didn't think it was right, and say, well, actually, look, I tested these 2 variations and the thing you asked me to do was okay, but 3 out of the 5 people really struggle with this area here. So again, evidence-based kind of, pushback, rather than kind of like, I'm a designer, you should trust me, believe what I say, kind of like ego-driven pushback. But yeah, like I say, sometimes you might have to pick your battles, and you might have to let a few smaller things go to demonstrate value, to show and build trust, so that when something comes across your desk that you think is really important, you have the credibility to say, well, look, actually, I think this is a really, really bad idea, and here's why. But this is the problem. Like, I think designers generally don't go in with the evidence. They go in with this is a terrible idea, and here is an example of this in the wild. Here's some usability testing results. Here is an article from Jared Spall around why this is a terrible idea. Bring some evidence rather than just opinion.
Yeah. So another topic that's pretty much related to what we discussed right now with juniors or saying no, but also with one of the topics you mentioned, or one of the learnings you mentioned from the conference, which is this lack of business literacy, is also the design education. So as someone who has so much experience with hiring designers and also running design conferences, I wanted to pick your brain on this topic. So what is your opinion of the current state of design education? Let's begin broad.
Yes. No, I mean, again, design education is an area that I'm fascinated with and frustrated with in equal measure. So I would say that globally, there are probably a dozen or 2 dozen institutions that have courses that operate at a very high level. There are organizations, in the US, I've met some amazing graduates from the SVA course, MFA on interaction design, and they consistently push out really, really amazing graduates. The university in the north of Denmark, whose name escapes me now, that's really terrible. It will come back to me in a second. There's a really, really great education institution in the north of Denmark.
CIID?
Yeah, that's it. CIID.
Yeah.
Also, they've got an amazing group of lecturers, many visiting kind of lecturers that come from industry. You might even do stuff there yourself, I don't know. And they push out a really, really high level of quality. So if you are a younger person, or not even younger person, if you're somebody that's wanted to break into design, getting on one of these courses will set you up really, really strongly, because you'll learn really, really good techniques that are practical. You will be taught by industry experts that will have connections. And when you go into the workplace, people will see that you've worked, you've studied in these places, and there will be a reasonable level of respect. However, I would say, what is it? 90% of everything is shit. I can't remember. Is it 80? Is it 95? But basically, the vast majority of university courses are not like this. The vast majority of university courses, I think, are still, massively out of date. They're often run by people that haven't been in industry for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, if they've been in industry at all. Often they are run by graphic design departments that don't really get technology, or they're run by engineering departments that don't really get design, or they're run by business departments that don't get either. And they are often just filling a gap. And I still to this day speak to lots of recent graduates that have gone through these courses and felt cheated, basically. They felt that they've spent very, very large amounts of money to get a substandard education that they would have been better off learning on the job. Mm-hmm. And so, I am not the world's biggest fan of General Assembly. And again, I think the General Assembly and organizations like it have quality varies dramatically geographically depending on who is leading the course. But I have seen a lot of people come out of the London General Assembly course, their 10 or 12 week interaction design intensive, who I believe have come out after 12 weeks having the same or better quality of output. So I can't attest to the quality of education, but if I look at a portfolio of a General Assembly graduate in London, I could probably not tell the difference between that and someone that spent 3 years, on a bachelor's degree. And actually, often they're much better, because often the General Assembly courses are really, really focused around producing portfolios that are employable. Whereas you look at, the majority of bachelor's degrees, and you'll have like one shonky web project, you'll have some really awful service design project, you'll have one really bad art installation digital product, and it's fun, but you're producing graduates that then basically just have no value or employability in the workplace. And I think if you are going to spend, if you're going to spend 3 years on a bachelor's degree, you may, in order to get into the industry, you might be better off in many instances just doing a 10-week General Assembly course and then going straight into industry. If you are wanting to really, really nail your career, a master's course at one of the bigger universities that I mentioned, might be worthwhile. I was speaking to a young designer only yesterday who decided that rather than going to university and end up in debt, he would spend a year being a intern, and loved it, and then got a second job and a third job and a fourth job, and has now worked on some of the biggest, most interesting design teams in the UK, on some of the most biggest interesting startup projects, and hasn't looked back. And rather than ending up with £40,000 worth of debt, he's ended up with an amazing portfolio of work, great work experience. And so, for a lot of younger designers, I actually think, it might be right to skip degrees altogether and go straight into the workplace. That requires a little bit of, kind of self-starter attitude. But one of the great things about design is the barrier to entry is quite low. You can get a copy of some design software. You can, design a website or product or service for yourself or a friend, or just explore and play, and you can probably learn as much self-directed as you can in many 3-year courses. So that's my position, really.
Yeah, so for example, my wife, she did the same, right? She took like a course at Career Foundry for 6 months, and now she has a job. So she's been working as a UX designer for 2 years, and it is definitely catapulted her path and career into design. One thing you mentioned in there was employable portfolio. What is that? What is employable portfolio?
Okay. So as somebody who is hiring designers, I want to see examples in their portfolio that are similar to the kind of problems I want them to solve. So as an agency, we might work with an airline, we might work with an app company, we might work with an e-commerce store. And so having a portfolio that demonstrates to me that you have worked in these spaces, or if you thought about these spaces, is really useful. And, these might be real live jobs if you're a little bit more progressed in your career. They might just be, college courses. Your college lecturer or your General Assembly kind of guide might have said, okay, well, today I want you to, redesign the in-flight, entertainment system of an airline. And that's great if you're a service design company that wants to hire those kind of people. What I often see is, and this is one of the challenges, because then this gets into a question around, is education around making you job ready, or is education around immersing you in a field of study, a field of practice? For many people, they go to university because they want to become job ready. And if that is your focus, then coming out with a set of portfolio pieces that look like the kind of thing you could be hired to do, I think is really useful. If you come out of a university course, and like I say, you've got a portfolio piece that is a photography, project. One is an interactive LED light, exhibit. One of them is a service design project for getting needles to sub-Saharan Africa. And you're going to a design agency, or you're going to, a fast-moving, tech scale-up that is focused on building apps and that kind of stuff. They probably look at your portfolio and say, well, that's really interesting, but how does this interactive light exhibit and how does this, service design project in Africa relate to us shipping the next version of our banking app? And it's a really tough call, and these people might be super talented, but if they can't demonstrate relevant skills and somebody else can, then they're going to be at disadvantage. And so I think that's one angle. I think the other angle, just around portfolios, is that a lot of people focus purely on the output of a portfolio. So you see many people that their portfolio is just, here's the end product. And as a hiring person, that end product is useful. It's pretty, it's nice, but yeah, the process is important. When I was at school, my lecturer or university, my maths lecturer said, you get 50% of the points for knowing the right answer and 50% of the points for showing the workings. Mm-hmm. Because the answer demonstrates you got it right, but you don't know if you managed to get there accidentally. The workings demonstrate that you really understood what you were doing. And it's exactly the same with design. You could be just a really lucky, talented, creative person that spends a lot of time on Dribble and can mimic trends. And on the surface, it looks really pretty. But did it solve the problem you were setting out to solve? Did you have a repeatable process? So if I gave you a different problem, you could, follow that process in order to solve a different kind of problem. Do you know what worked and what didn't? Can you look at this point and say, well, actually, I diverged here, and this is why, and I went down this cul-de-sac and it didn't work. The other thing is a lot of designers on their CV or their LinkedIn profile will have a big list of things that they can claim to do. Some of them, they'll have a little pie chart or a little bar graph that says, well, I'm 80% good at prototyping. I'm 100% good at design thinking. Well, that's great, but give me evidence. If you're saying that you're 80%, amazing at doing a user journey map, I want to see a user journey map. I want to see 5 user journey maps. I want to see high fidelity. I want to see low fidelity. I want to see one that you've just done in an afternoon with sticky notes. I want to see one that, solves a complex problem. I want to see one that solves a simple problem. Evidence this. Because otherwise, what I assume is by saying that you've got 80% experience of journey mapping is you probably read a Medium post. You probably read, I kind of know what a journey map is. I reckon if I got asked to make a journey map, I could have a crack at it. That's very different from saying, well, here's 5 journey maps I've done, and this is why I chose this approach on this one I chose this approach on this one. And this journey map I was just using it to think through a problem. This journey map was deliverable in order to solve a strategic problem that I pitched to the board at this company in order to sort of facilitate this change. And so, yeah, I want to see your workings. I want to see photos of you doing stuff. I want to see you leading teams. I want to see you sketching. I want to see you prototyping. And I want to see you doing this across a bunch of mediums. Again, like, a lot of people find crutches. A lot of designers, particularly product designers, will be, I'm brilliant at using Figma. But maybe you go into a company and Figma isn't their thing. Maybe they're using something else. So I want you to be able to demonstrate to me that you're not just using one tool as a crutch. If I say to you, okay, well, I'm sorry, but you've got to use Adobe XD on this project, you're not going to be like, oh, I don't know how to do that. You'll be like, great, because it's not a piece of software that you have learned. It's a process that you've learned, and you can apply that process to a whole range of tools and outputs and outcomes.
Amazing. Great advice. Andy, I think we covered a lot of topics, and you shared the current state of design community with us. So when is the next conference that we could come and immerse ourselves in the experience?
I appreciate the opportunity of a plug. That's very kind of you. I wasn't expecting it, but I'll try and take advantage of that. So I believe that we probably have about 30 tickets left for Leading Design San Francisco. And Leading Design San Francisco is the beginning of March. I'm going to say the 3rd or the 4th. I'm probably wrong there, but it's
4th to 6th.
Perfect. There you go. See, I wasn't prepared for this, but you have done. So yeah. So and that would be really, really good fun. And I'm so excited about some of the speakers we've got there, particularly Julie Zhu. Julie Zhu is an amazing design leader. Her books and her writing is just outstanding. I mean, obviously there's tons of other amazing people speaking, but we got Julie Zhu a little bit sort of last minute. I've been trying to get her to speak at Leading Design for a while, and we managed to kind of nail that down quite recently. And so she's going to be amazing, as is everybody else. We are just starting to plan Leading Design London, which will be in November sometime. I think it's maybe the 6th to the 8th of November.
Also 4th to 6th, actually.
4th to 6th. Okay. Well, yeah, there you go. So 4th to 6th of November. And and so those two Leading Design events are coming up, and they should be really good fun.
Amazing. And you also have some smaller meetups, right? Is that just in London and San Francisco, or do you also plan to do them elsewhere?
Yeah, we really want to do them elsewhere. I mean, I'm going to be heading over to, after Leading Design in San Francisco, I'm going to be heading over to South by Southwest. I haven't been to South by for about 3-4 years. I love Austin. I've been through kind of a bit of a roller coaster with South by. I used to love it, then I hated it, and now I quite like it again. But I'm going to be in Austin, end of March, I think like 18th or 17th of March. I'm probably going to be organising a little design leadership get together there. I'm speaking at awards conference in a couple of weeks' time in Amsterdam. I'm probably going to be organising a little design leadership get together there. We're doing bigger leadership meetups in London. We're probably going to start doing them in New York. And if there are local groups that want to sort of put design leadership events on, please do come and give us a shout. We want designers to have a local community that they can draw upon. So the more of these kind of like meetups and networks, and we run this design leadership Slack channel, Leading Design Slack channel. We've got about 1,300 members. And a lot of the members on there will do little events, and it might just be a dinner for 6 people here, or like a meetup for 20 people there.
Nice.
But that's how kind of like communities grow and networks form and kind of movements happen. So design, like I said, has finally got a seat at the table, and we all need to kind of help each other out to kind of embed that and help design hit the levels that we know it can.
So if somebody has an idea to host a meetup in their city, how can they reach out to you to make it happen?
Well, if you're a member of the Leading Design Slack channel, hit me up on that. If you're not a member of the Leading Design channel and you'd like to join, you can reach out to me on Twitter or go to leadingdesign.com drop me an email at andy@clearleft.com. The Leading Design Slack channel is really aimed at kind of more senior design leaders. So it's people that are sort of managing teams rather than sort of, design lead with sort of 3 or 4 designers. We've got people on there that, average probably are leading teams of like 20 to sort of 50 people. Mm-hmm. So it's more that kind of senior level. But if you fit in that sort of a category and you want to join, hook me up. Or the other thing is just to organize one and then email me afterwards and say, hey, Andy, we ran a design dinner and it was great. And here's some pictures. And it's always nice to see people doing stuff independently. So, yeah.
Cool, Andy. Well, thanks again for sharing experience, for taking the time to talk to me and to talk to basically to listeners.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you. And yeah, I'd love to do this again in a couple of years' time.
So that's everything in today's episode. If you have any comments about this episode, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or just send me an email at alan@beyondusers.com. And again, if you want to learn more about business to become a better design leader, you can sign up for a 7-day mini MBA course, which is completely free. And yeah, you can find it on beyondusers.com.